This week we are shining the light on the US elections 2020. It's barely a week, the elections. Today we want to get a sense of where we stand, where the two parties stand. That's the Democrats and the GOP. And as always, I have my panelists, Professor Monda, Dr. Nathan Wangusi, Dr. David Makobe, and our writer, Washington Osiro. Today they're going to give us a sense of where we are as we turn the corner to the elections. Next time we meet you again, we'll be talking about what happened. So we want to explore all these angles on how this is likely to turn out. Straight away, I want to ask Professor Monda to give us a situation analysis of where we are, especially after the recent debates. Now we don't have debates anymore. Now we're down to the wire. So Professor, welcome again to the show, and please just give us a situation analysis of where we stand in terms of the US elections, barely a week to the D-Day.
So we're barely a week to the D-Day. I think there's a lot of motivation on both sides, on the side of the Republicans and on the side of the Democrats. We were supposed to have 3 debates, but we ended up having 2 debates because President Trump rejected the second debate, which was going to be a virtual debate. So looking very quickly over the year and in terms of how we got to where we are right now, earlier in the year, Trump's numbers looked really good before COVID. The economy was doing pretty well, and almost everyone, all pundits were arguing that Trump was going to have a pretty strong chance of retaining the presidency. Then we had COVID, and you've had in New York State alone, 40,000 people, we've been hit the hardest, are dead from COVID. And in the whole United States, we are up to 200,000 people and counting who are dead. And now the disease has moved from the East Coast and is now severely affecting the West Coast. And this dynamic has really influenced the election. As we speak right now, the key focus on the election for November 3rd is the swing states. And essentially on Biden's side, Biden's trying to play offense. In other words, he's trying to not only retain the seats, the states that Hillary Clinton won, but also to get those swing states that are very important. The 4 most important ones for Biden will be Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And for Trump, he's really playing defense, which is a complete opposite. He's really trying to retain the states that he won in 2016, because if he retains those states, he automatically will win the election. He'll get more than 270 electoral college votes. So the place we are right now, as we speak, just before this election, is both candidates are really focused on those swing states, mainly with Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Florida. And Biden's actually having some good input in some formerly Republican states, in states like Georgia and places like Arizona. And Chris, in conclusion, as much as we have this presidential election, our viewers should also remember we also have members of the House of Representatives who every 2 years are also re-elected. So this year, all 435 members of the House are up for re-election. We also have about 35 members of the Senate who are up for re-election in this election cycle. So as much as we focus on the presidency, there's also other elections which are significantly going to be impacted and that are important. And key to that in this case is the Senate. There's a big divide in the Senate. It's split almost half and half between Republicans and Democrats. Democrats currently have 47 Senate seats. Republicans have 53. The Democrats are hoping that Biden can win the presidency, and he can also win at least 3 of those states that are currently held by Republicans. That way, the Democrats will have an advantage in the Senate, because if Biden wins the presidency, the vice president automatically becomes an extra vote in the Senate, And if he wins 3 other states, then the Democrats will have an advantage. Or Biden can win 4 of those seats from the Republicans currently that are up in play.
So Nathan, like Professor has said, there are just no key states that we have to look at right now to pay keen interest in. And of course, you're speaking to us from Orlando, Florida, and Florida seems to be in play this year. In your view, what are the traps that the Democrats need to look out for before the elections?
Chris, thanks for having me on the show as usual, and to my esteemed colleagues. So I think you mentioned a really critical question about electoral college votes within what we call the toss-up or the purple states, those that swing between Republicans and Democrats. And in fact, for Florida, it's a very interesting state because the central part of the state, which is exactly where we are, Orlando, going into the counties out till Tampa, it's what is called the I-4 corridor. And that's sort of where the bulk of the population in Florida is. So they often say in recent times that elections in the US are won and lost in the I-4 corridor. And it's a really critical place to watch because it not only has a strong Democratic majority within the counties around Orlando, but also some of the retirement spots in Florida that flip the election. So if you've heard about the villages where there have been some incidences in the past, as well as St. Petersburg. So those areas are primarily retirement areas here in Florida. And those areas are strongly Republican. So if they can flip this set of counties across the I-4 corridor, they can guarantee themselves 29, the Democrats can guarantee themselves 29 electoral college votes. It's quite a big number. And if you remember in 2000, the really contentious election between Bush and Al Gore, it all came down to the I-4 corridor. So it's a really critical spot to win this election. Basically, if you go north of the I-4 corridor, it's mostly Republican. If you go south, it's mostly Democrat. So it's a really critical spot. But this scenario plays itself out in many of the other toss-up states. So Monda mentioned Arizona, he mentioned Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, and other traditionally Republican states such as Texas, which are in play. And if you notice during the debate, just a quick commentary on what I thought about the debate was, Trump was kind of out of his element, mostly because I think he had been sick and he had a lot of criticism that he was disrupting, and that's where he performs the best, when he's combative and aggressive towards his opponents. But now he had to sort of tone it down, but he's not very good on content, and that's where I think Biden really shone. But you notice that he mentioned those states quite prominently with respect to the oil industry. And so it's really critical for us to watch those traditional, the few traditional Republican states like Arizona and Texas that could flip. And then it's also really critical to watch the purple states like North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, that sometime that have been won by different parties over the years, depending on what the main issues are. Just make one comment that I think it's really important, beyond just watching for those states, it's to also watch, to also pay attention on what the main issues for this election are. And I think in this last stretch of 10 days towards the election, COVID-19, given that the numbers have, there's a resurgence in infections, Trump's traditional base are the old retirees in some of these states where the numbers for infection are going up. It's really important to keep that in mind, because I think that's what is going to be the deciding factor. In addition to everything else, but I think this is going to be a deciding factor.
That's right. That's true. In fact, no, this election is looking very different because of exactly that, the way President Trump has handled the COVID-19 issue. But let me bring in Dr. Makobe, the man from Delaware, Amakobe lives barely 15 kilometers away from the incoming president, Vice President Joe Biden, and I know Amakobe was on Zoom meeting. By the way, Amakobe is a Democrat and he's really involved in local politics. And before we came to the show, he was hosting a Zoom meeting with the leaders in Delaware and asking questions on how the African immigrants are going to benefit from the leadership if they have to vote for Joe Biden. But David, please speak to us about how the Democrats are feeling right now as we go into the last dying minutes and hours and days of the U.S. elections 2020.
Thank you, Chris, for having me. And thank you, the other panelists, for being here. I think that, like the other panelists have said, this is a very close election. And considering what happened in 2016, I think nobody can be sure what can happen. But what we know is, as of now, this is a turnout election, meaning the more of your voters you can get out, the more chances there are that you can be able to win this election. And also we know for sure that there are states which are hardly put, they are either Democrats or they are Republicans, but there are states which determine this election. States like Professor Monda said, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, and Arizona. So basically, what I was just looking at my phone, I got a text saying, "Can you do phone calls to Florida?" Basically, I'm in Delaware, but I'm going to have to make phone calls to Florida. That's how Democrats are organizing, and I think that even the Republicans are organizing that, and also making sure that because of the way the voting has changed, most of the people are voting by mail, ensuring that when they get the ballot, they know how to fill it. They know how to return it. Because if you do not know how to vote right by mail, your vote is lost. So basically, normally on the vote count, the Democrats normally have a majority vote. Almost for the last of 10 elections, Democrats have had the majority vote. Okay, but of those ones, some of them the Republicans have won because of the college vote. You understand? So basically, what I know that the Democrats should be doing, they should be looking at the turnout turnout for their side, make sure that actually their people are elected in their states, and looking at the states, a state like Pennsylvania, which basically in the cities is Democratic, and there's a problem with the African American or Black male votes, the turnout of them, because like you had 50 Cent say, he wants to go and vote the other side because of taxes, or they don't want to vote at all. So basically, what this election is turning out to be, making sure that you split the voters, meet their needs, and explain to them why they should go and vote. And basically, that's what we're doing. And we are really hoping that we bring this one in, but we cannot promise you that somebody is sitting there thinking this is home. Everybody has to vote and make sure vote right, so that on November 4th, we can be able to say we got the vote right.
Thank you, Dr. Amakobe. Washington.
Yes.
The man from San Francisco, California. So like Amakobe has said, there's the fear that this is most likely to be a very close election. And when it's close election, like it happened in 2000, there are likely to be lawsuits and contested issues. In your view, give us, just remind our viewers on what contested elections mean, especially in America.
Thank you, Chris, for the introduction. And again, it's an honor to be amongst quite an esteemed panel, set of panelists. So thank you very much. So a contested election basically means that the losing challenger does not accept the results. I think we saw that in 2000 when Al Gore basically contested the results of the Florida vote. And the good thing, this is actually speaks to the importance of having strong institutions, because yes, there were contested results, but Al Gore allowed the process to play out. And unfortunately, he came out on the short end of the Supreme Court ruling, which basically gave the 2000 elections to George Bush. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what a contested election basically looks like, where the loser does not accept the results, and then allows the process which is laid out to play out. And then in this particular case, there's a Supreme Court ruling, and both sides accepted the outcome. Now, fast forward 20 years, 2 decades, and we're looking at an entirely different landscape, where the incumbent is basically questioning the validity of the vote even before the results are announced. So it's I know from just reading and listening to the news that both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans, have amassed not only financial war chest, but they have lined up constitutional lawyers, all the way from Florida to DC, just in anticipation of court challenges surrounding the outcome of the votes. So as the other panelists have kind of alluded to, I'm going to be speaking out of two sides of my mouth. If you look at the polling data, then the Democrats are in a pretty strong position. But again, I say that, and I also caution that in 2016, the polling data pointed to a Democratic victory, and we know how that turned out. So I think that I would rather be in Biden's position than in Trump's position, just because of the data. Beyond that, the fact that President Trump has talked down the validity of the votes, of the ballots, the rigging of the results, has really compelled a lot of people to vote early. So if you look at the data that is changing almost by the day, back in 2016, almost 129 million people voted between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. As of this week, almost 50 million people have already voted. So, I mean, that is almost half of the people have already voted with a week to go. Yeah. So the turnout is obviously going to be massive. Again, just before we went live, I was pointing to the youth vote. That is the 18 to 28 years old. In the states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and I want to say Pennsylvania, the numbers are just out of the roof between 2016 and 2020. So, this election is going to be turnout for sure. It's going to be about early voting, which we are already seeing, and that normally trends Democratic. I'm going to be looking out for how white women vote, because in the last elections they voted for, surprisingly, a majority of them voted for Donald Trump. I'm also curious to see how the Hispanics vote, especially in places like Florida. And when I say Hispanic, we're talking about we've got Cuban Americans, we've got Venezuelans, we've got Puerto Ricans. I'm curious to see whether Puerto Ricans vote in numbers commensurate with the numbers that fled the island when the hurricane hit. And then I'm also curious to see whether Joe Biden can close the gap between as far as the white men go. So, because I know Trump ran up the numbers as far as the white male voters go. I'm curious to see whether the fact that Biden speaks more to that blue-collar, non-working, a blue-collar, non-college educated voting bloc. I'm curious to see whether the gap between Trump and Biden kind of closes up. All in all, back to what Dr. Makobe says, the two sides have amassed a war chest and have lawyers in case the vote is contested. So, and the process is kind of defined for that to happen. Though I'm also curious to see what happens if there's a tie. Both sides get 269 votes.
That's right. That's right.
That's really it will be highly unlikely.
And then I'm also,
comment. If you allow me to comment quickly on one of the demographics that I'm really watching on this election, and particularly because in the last 2 weeks, the president, who is also a baby boomer, who comes from this demographic, was sick with COVID. And for the longest time, he came out as a tough guy who was immune, and he played very well his narrative very well to this demographic, who typically on election day come out in full force to vote. A lot of them are now retired, so they'll have the time to actually go to the polls and vote. And these are largely Republican voters. I mentioned the villages, and that's one of sort of the strongholds within Florida. But what has just happened is that we've had a president who comes from this demographic and sort of represents this voter group gets sick. So I'm interested to see whether that is enough to make them think twice about voting for him. But yeah, you were saying.
No, yeah, I just think that, and then I think, was it you, Nathan, or Dr. Monda, who touched on COVID. So COVID is going to change how, and you already see it in the early voting. People are voting early, whether it's by mail or whether online, because of COVID. So I think all in all, back to your original question, contested elections, the two sides fully anticipate that. The two sides have amassed a war chest of funds and of lawyers, of constitutional lawyers, election lawyers, to address any potential issues that might come out of whether it's ballot stuffing, whether it's signatures don't match, whatever the issues might come out of the various, especially in the battleground states. I think the two sides are prepared for that, but even more importantly, the process is in place based on what we saw in 2000 for a contested election to play out. Hopefully, and I said hopefully because there's this undercurrent of violence kind of erupting because of groups like the Proud Boys, white supremacists, and really because of the president's utterances. But I will be very, very surprised if we see the kind of violence that we see in contested elections in Africa come November 3rd or November 4th. So,
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. And just to wrap it up, that again speaks to the value of strong institutions that are able to withstand any dislocations in the society writ large.
Thanks, Washington. Professor, the good thing is that we learn from history, and you're a professor of history. Right now, as we speak, the Democrats are looking good. But history also tells us that it's too early to toast to the win. Can you just speak to that as to the importance of not just sitting back as Democrats and thinking that it's all in the bag?
Yes, I think that's a very important point, because this election is a lot closer than a lot of people think. In 2016, we had all the major networks write off Donald Trump, and the polling they had done was not particularly accurate because they undercounted in particular districts. And I say this because if you look at the places Trump has been campaigning over the last week or so, for example, in Michigan, Michigan is overwhelmingly a red state historically. And Hillary Clinton lost Michigan by a couple 100,000 votes, very, very close margin. In Wisconsin, it was the same, and in Pennsylvania, it was the same. And Trump was very strategic when he went to Michigan this past week. He went specifically to those two counties that voted for Hillary Clinton and that were able to swing, that were able to vote for Hillary Clinton. So he's very careful to try and make sure he bridges that gap. So it's important for our viewers to understand that in these key swing states, it's a razor-thin margin between the Democrats and the Republicans. Historically, for example, in Florida, the margin of victory has been very, very narrow, less than half of 1% historically. And then you look at a place like Michigan, again, it's been very close. And also in Wisconsin, in places like Pennsylvania. So going back to our earlier discussion about disputes, there's a lot of very interesting scenarios that could come up. And I'll explain a couple of them. What, for example, happens in a place like Florida, where if Trump loses the 29 electoral college votes, he's virtually almost assured of losing the election. There'll definitely be a contest there. We know about Florida's state law that re-enfranchised inmates. It allowed former inmates now to vote. Now, there's been big politics around the Republicans denying such former inmates to vote. Now, that could create its own problems. There's what Nathan was mentioning about the older voters. Now, a lot of them are very upset with Trump because he's looking to eliminate Obamacare. A lot of them are older, they're worried about their health care. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic. But also in terms of conflict, Chris, what happens when in a state like Pennsylvania, if we have a dispute, electoral dispute in Pennsylvania, and then the state sends 2 congressional delegations to Washington after the vote is counted. In other words, after the election's decided, the Republican governor, the Democratic governor in Pennsylvania sends his delegation of electors to DC to certify the election, but the Senate and the House of the state legislature send their own delegation. That could create another very, very volatile level of conflict in terms of the election. So it's not a done deal, and I would urge the Democrats not to start toasting, because as the minute people assume Democrats have won, a lot of Democrats will stay home. And Republicans will come out to vote, and this could swing the election in just these very key states.
Let me point out
there's also something, there's something Osuru said that I think I disagree with, because over the last couple of months, we've seen a lot of social upheaval in the United States. And you were saying that because of the strength of judicial and electoral institutions, we should be confident that there's not going to be any civil unrest. So I would argue. But
I said I would be surprised if we see the level of.
But given the amount of incitement that has been going on,
I agree.
The fact that you have a president who has gone out to basically give an extremist group, the Proud Boys, he's given them marching orders. And then you also still have a lot of tension because of the Black Lives Matter movement. And then you again also have this potential for electoral disputes that will raise temperatures. One of the things I've also been watching is the numbers on gun sales, and you'd be surprised how many people are
but David.
So I think as much as we are confident in the institutions, it's worth paying attention to the fact that we've had a lot of civil.
I agree that it is worth being mindful of the level of the amount of tension and the level of gun sales, and really the legitimization of extremists that the president has been party to. But if you really look at it, it's not only the court, the judiciary, it is law enforcement. It is not only law enforcement, but it's the intelligence. The FBI is on top of it. I mean, I think they just busted some threat of assassination to the governor of Michigan. So, all in all, I'm not saying that I'm not blind to the fact that the violence is real, but I'm also saying that, and I'm looking at it comparatively, that I think whether it's the judiciary, law enforcement, intelligence, those institutions are mature and strong enough to withstand, any dislocations that might come about as a result of a disputed election.
Guys, I think that's a good place to end the show. Of course, we're going to come back to these issues a week from today, and now critique the Trump's or Biden's agenda for African immigrants and Africa as a continent in general. But for now, I think let's call it a day. Let's congregate again next week to review some of these things. But most likely next week we're going to be talking about BBI.
Blue Band Initiative.
Blue Band Initiative.
Please, sana. Sipendi ujinga mimi.
Osiro hapendi ujinga, and hapendi ujinga signing off. Viewers, this has been the Diaspora Life Show. See you again next week.
I love you guys, man.
Osiro hapendi ujinga.
I am. Okay, fool. That's it. Good.
All right, guys. Bye.
All right, see you guys.
See you guys. Bye-bye,
Guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, cheers, bye.
Bye.